Hello everyone, thanks so much for joining us in today's Warrior Chat. I think we have a really interesting topic, so I appreciate so much you're joining us. I'm Wayne McCullough, the Chief Financial and Operations Officer here at Southern York County School District, and with me is Mrs. Susan Green, who is the Business Manager at Southern York County School District. And we're going to talk a little bit about the 2015-2016 school district budget. So I think it's important for everyone. So again, thanks so much for being with us. First of all, Mrs. Green, thank you for all you do. Mrs. Green, it's nice just to share with everyone, but certainly we're very, very fortunate to have somebody of Mrs. Green's talent and caliber here for the school district, and so we appreciate all you do. Mrs. Green probably gets tired of hearing me say it, but she's unique in her skill set that she is a certified public accountant as well as has an MBA in her tool belt, so she comes with just great skill set, so we appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about the process of developing the 2015-16 fiscal budget of the school district. We say often that you have to not just look at this current year, you have to look not only at next year, but look at how we performed, certainly in the most recent year. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of how, from a financial basis, the school district performed to what we expected when we made a budget for 2013-14? And then we'll look at 14-15 this year, so our previous budget year. The years kind of get convoluted a little bit.
They do. We're usually working in 3 different years, so we'll go back to 13-14, which is our last year that we finished. So we performed well, better than what we expected. And that was a concerted effort by all the administrators and all the staff in the district to only spend what was absolutely necessary, which is always our mantra in the district. Make sure that we only spend what's absolutely necessary so that we can save and make sure we have money going forward. So we did perform better than what we expected, and we didn't run a surplus. We used a little bit of our savings, which we expected to do, but less than we thought. So the expenses were down, revenues were up a little bit, so we did perform better than what we expected. So the way the process works is in October I meet with each administrator and talk to them about what happened, how they did last year, and then talk about what's going on for the current year, so 14-15. And then we talk about, what do you think you're going to need for 15-16. So we start that process way back in October.
Very good. Let's back up again to 13-14 just briefly. What you talk about expenses being a little bit less than we had budgeted, revenue being a little bit more. Can you talk about maybe what makes up some of that?
Some of the things is one of the big things that we had a difference in was our salaries and wages for folks. So what we did last year, when someone would leave the district, we would have a concerted discussion on whether we need to fill that position or permanently or not throughout the year. So we experienced savings from that when folks would leave, and we would either not fill the position or put in a substitute to evaluate each and every position each year. So that's part of it. Also, as we look at supplies and those types of things, because we're a school district, we have to budget for, what would happen. Any child enrolls in the district at any time, we need to make sure that we're ready for them. So some of the things are we didn't have as many charter school children as what we had anticipated. And again, that was a concerted effort to have students go into our own digital academy. So we're very proud of our digital academy. It's doing very well. And when we can keep those students in the district, we think we're giving them a better opportunity and a better education. And also it is helping with the budget and savings.
Good. Obviously, we already talked about 2 parts of the budget, an expense side or revenue side. Let's just back up, take a global view. From a revenue side, the majority of the revenue really comes from the local level. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
It does. Most of our revenue, probably 60, 65%, 70%, is from our local level: real estate taxes, earned income taxes, realty transfer taxes, interest income, which has not been very good lately.
Right.
So we're hoping that turns around. But really, when taxpayers look at how the school's funded, it is really funded predominantly by real estate taxes. That is the way that it's mostly funded.
Yeah, the interesting thing, I think, for our public at home, as late as the late 1970s, early 1980s, the state's contribution to the cost of public schools was really almost shared 50%, 50%. And gradually, since the late 70s, early 80s, statewide, and also here at Southern York County School District, that balance has shifted from about 70%, just a little shy of that, from a local level to 30% at the state level. Which is a major reason that people have experienced higher local real estate taxes. It's really a shifting of funding of public schools from a state level, which is primarily funded from income tax, to the local level, which is primarily funded from a real estate tax.
Yes, and in addition to that, I mean, we, back in 08, 09, 9, 10, 2009, 2010, we would get grants to help with programs, such as charter school reimbursements, accountability block grants to help with things like full-day kindergarten and math coaches, Classrooms for the Future to help with technology, and basically all of that funding is either almost very, very small or gone. So like charter school funding, we would get between 25 and 30% reimbursement of our expenses, and now we don't get any reimbursement. So we have to pick up the difference somewhere.
The interesting thing, there's so much focus on school funding, as it should be, because a major portion of, obviously, people's taxes really go to public schools, and certainly from a local community, we appreciate it. I know here at Southern York County School District, in our community, we have a history of people supporting public education, so we value that and appreciate that very much. And also our commitment is always, and I don't think we can oversay it, I don't think we can overdo it, is to make sure that every dollar that our community provides for us to provide an outstanding educational program for our children is one that we respect, and we make sure that we take care of every dollar and spend it wisely. The interesting thing about that, again, from a revenue standpoint, the information, you hear so much different information. Sometimes you pick up the paper and somebody, whether it's a politician or whatever, is saying, well, school funding is at its highest level ever. And then you pick up the paper and another, for example, Governor Wolf, who has run and been elected as governor of Pennsylvania, says, well, that's not true. It's at a lower level. So from a Southern York County School District, what is the fact in terms of that?
Well, one of the things that is pushing some of the funding is legislative pension costs. So the way the pension system works is the legislature approves a rate, the pension system approves a rate, and the legislature approves that rate in the budget. A rate that we must pay each year based on salaries. So for next year, it's 25.84% of each salary dollar we have to pay into the pension system. And we get 50% reimbursement from the state. So as that is increased from a low of below 1% up to 25.84%, there are more dollars flowing. But what's interesting is that when it was very low, that funding was not in the education budget.
Right.
Then when it became higher, it got put back into the education budget to show that more money was going into education. Now I think one of the things that Governor was talking about is taking it back out again. I think his proposed budget has it in a different line item, not in education.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, yes, there's more state funding coming for the pension fund, but it's not dollars we can put in the classroom. It's required dollars that are mandated that we pay, and we don't have a lot of, we don't have any control over what that rate is.
Right.
So we can't pay higher one year so that we can smooth it out. We have to pay what the legislators say we have to pay.
Okay, and from an expense standpoint, the majority of the expense side really is for staffing, which, if you really take time and think about it, is really where it should be. Because we know our success relates to having teachers in the classroom.
We're a professional services organization, so any professional services organization is predominantly salaries and benefits. And the service we provide is education for children. So, yes, most of what we have are salaries and benefits. So you can't have a staff member without having Social Security and pension and those types of things, because again, in Pennsylvania, it's mandated that our employees have that pension system. So we can't hire someone and say you don't get the pension
Right.
or you don't get this or that. It is mandated. So every dollar we go for salaries, we have to keep that in mind, that we also have to pay that.
Okay, so we backed up a year. Let's look at the current year, the fiscal year. Gosh, we're already into the springtime. How is the school district budget from an expense and a revenue side performing this year?
We're doing pretty good. Revenues aren't quite as high as what I'd like to see them. They're still they're stable. They're stable this year, which is very good. Coming up a little bit. We have seen an increase in our assessment, so our overall amount that we can tax in the district. So that's helped in real estate,
Yeah.
again, because that's our biggest revenue source. From an expense side, well, let's go back to revenue quickly. One of the things that was exciting in November, we finally got our money from the state for the Friendship Building.
Yeah.
So we were owed back money for that. So we received that money, so that's great, and that is helping. So we were owed a lot of that back to 2010. It's good that we've now received that money for the Friendship Project, and we're on par with the funding there. So that's helped with the budget. So we are slated to finish the year, again, better than what we thought, but still use some fund balance. So we were going to use about 1.6 million, so we're not going to use near that much. I think it's around 400,000, give or take, at this point. So much better, again, looking at each and every expenditure, each and every vacancy throughout the year.
Let's talk a little bit about fund balance. When we talk about fund balance, we talk about, as you mentioned, our savings. What's our desired level, current, how do we fall within that level, and why is it important for us as a school district to have a fund balance?
When we look at the budget, we always look at what that fund balance or savings is, and really what that is that's the difference between your revenues and expenses each year. In Pennsylvania, the law is you cannot exceed your budget. So I talked a little bit before briefly about we
Can't overspend it, right?
You can't overspend it, right? So you can't go over your expenditure amount, which is a good thing. We never want to do that. But in Pennsylvania, again, we talk about we take every child. So we have to be prepared for any children that move in, any children with special needs, and anything like that. So, we do generally underspend our budget, and that is because we have to. We have to make sure that happens. So when we look at fund balance, it's the difference between revenues and expenses that flows in to fund balance. And it's important to have that because you need cash flow. You need to be able to pay people before money comes in the summer from real estate taxes. You need to have extra money in case there's an emergency, those types of things. So our district policy is that we keep around 5% in fund balance, and we make an effort to evaluate that constantly, and that's right around where we are right now.
Good. It's also in our policy not to exceed 8% of our budget in fund balance, in savings. And I think that's for good reason, because there are many municipalities, quite a few school districts that do exceed and grow that fund balance, and it's been the philosophy and the practice of our school board not to tax people just to put money in the bank, even though I think from a fiscal standpoint, somebody could argue, oh gosh, it's very uncertain times in terms of revenue, particularly from the state. You're putting a budget together before you know what revenue is coming from the state and so forth in recent years. But I think it's been a very solid practice of our school board not just to tax people to save money and put money in a savings account.
Yeah, probably the last 4 years or so, we have budgeted about $1.6 million using fund balance to balance the budget. And one of the reasons is we did have, at the end of the year, because of that difference between revenues and expense, we had a little more than the 5%, up closer to the 8-9%. And so we purposely put that there so that we would not grow that fund balance and be taxing to a level that we didn't need. We only want to tax to a level that we need. And we know that at some point the revenues will come around. Interest earnings will increase. The rates will go up. We will get new properties being built, which we're seeing some of that right now, which is helpful. So again, I think we realize that not only are we in a struggle right now, but our taxpayers also are going through that same recessionary time.
Absolutely.
And so we need to be conscious that we're not the only one having that problem, that also our taxpayers are also. So we don't want to tax any higher than we absolutely need to.
Yep, absolutely. Again, I think the important takeaway is we will not tax just to put money in a savings account. When we ask our community to provide revenue, which is very hard earned, and we do value that, it really is to drive the most outstanding educational program possible. And I think we have some data that we've shared in some more year chats, and you can go on our website, look up the annual report that supports that. I mean, when we talk about that, I call it return on investment, obviously, which is a financial terminology, but nonetheless, we believe with what is the next lowest real estate tax rate in the York County for school districts in our intermediate unit, compared to the success of our children, which is always in the top tier, I think we have an outstanding return on investment.
Agreed. I think, we want to make sure that we're doing a good job for our students, or a great job for our students, and also that we're understanding where that money's coming from at all times.
Yeah. All right, let's move ahead and talk about the 2015-16 budget. It's hard to believe. I don't know where 2016 gets in there, but it does. This budget process begins early fall, late summer, and it almost seems like we're never not in a budget process. But it was a very lengthy process, but I think a good one. Can you talk a little bit about the process that's involved?
Sure. What we do is we start in late October, I mentioned briefly before, and I meet with each administrator. We talk about what happened last year in 13-14. Then we talk about what's going on in their buildings or their areas for the current year. So how are things going? Do you think you're going to be over budget, under budget? What's happening? And then what are some of the needs that you have that you're seeing in your area or your building that you're going to need for next year, so we can start to talk about what those needs are for the 15-16 year. After that, then we work to put together all of the data. A lot of it's salary data, benefits data, because we talked before, that's the main portion. We have a Budget and Finance Committee meeting, or Finance and Budget Committee meeting with the board in early November, where we decide, the board decides whether or not they think they can stay within the index, so the PD
Right.
index. So there's two different budget processes. If you stay within the index, you use one process. If you go above the index, you have to use a different process. So at that point, our main focus is, can we stay within the taxing index for real estate taxes or not? And if we can, then we follow a more simplified budget process. It doesn't have as many regulations and filings. And our board has, for at least the last many years, not gone above the PD index. And I think that's important to
Absolutely.
note, because the index is in place based on some factors, some economic factors, to kind of give you a guideline for taxing increases. Now, you can go above if there's things that are happening in your district. Special ed expenses, for instance, is one example. Pension expenses is another. So you could take exceptions, but we have, for the most part, not done that. I think we've only done that 1 year since 2006.
Yeah, we're talking now about the 2015-16 budget for the Southern York County School District. This budget for 15-16 is not business as usual. It's not just taking our existing program and duplicating it with cost increases related to it. It really is looking at our entire program, from facilities, from an educational side, from an extracurricular, co-curricular side, looking at the whole program and setting priorities. And I do want to share with you now, the good news is the board directed the administration to use a reasonable assumption about state funding, what that level would be, even though at this point we don't know, other than what the governor has proposed for state funding, but to use a reasonable expectation of what that should be, as well as use of our fund balance, use of our savings to balance the budget without a tax increase.
Yes, so our budget that we had preliminarily approved or proposed approved in April does not have a tax increase in it.
Yeah.
So, when we went through the prioritization, there's no tax increase, and we were able to bring that budget.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about some of the priorities, and then we'll break down what we see from a revenue and expense standpoint. But one of the priorities, obviously, is to maintain class size, not only in the elementary school, but district-wide, class size as well as student-to-teacher ratio in our classes. And we're able to do that in this budget. We're really filling all but 2 positions from our teaching staff. At this point, we have 13 teachers that are leaving. We're filling 11 of them. And that's something we're proud of, because many school districts are just not able to fill positions right now. So I think that speaks well of our financial position.
Right. We have not, through all of this, laid off any staff or furloughed anyone. And we are able this year, like you said, to fill most positions. So I think that's, as we went down through as an administrative team and prioritized what was needed, some new things that we're going to add for next year. Again, as the priority, I think it's important to know we can do that with only not filling 2.
Yeah, and one of our other priorities is to continue the process and accelerate the process to infuse technology into our educational program. And this next year, our primary focus will be at the secondary level in the high school, where we have old, outdated computers that were purchased through a Classroom for the Futures grant during Governor Rendell's time period, where the state funded that. You had talked about grants that came, and some of them were, well, many of them were not renewed at that point. But we're replacing that equipment with technology in the hands of all students. And the interesting thing about that, with the cost of most of those computer devices driving down in today's world, sometimes they're not a whole lot more expensive than a textbook or 2.
Right. So it's something we need to move towards, the 21st century learning. It's important for children, and it was a priority of the administrative team.
Yeah, so I think the exciting thing about it is we're able to maintain class size, and we've always had a priority on good class size in the school district. We're able to move forward with technology, not reduce any programs, maintain all of our extracurricular, co-curricular programs, and that's been unique throughout the state too, because many school districts have had to reduce those programs outside the classroom as well.
And through the years, we've talked about creative ways to make sure that we're able to do that. And so some of the things are, we may not provide disposable things, but we're still able to provide the program. So when I talk about disposable, caps or socks or things that kids get to keep, but we can still provide the program. So we've really kind of looked at some creative ways to make sure that we can still maintain all those programs.
Yeah, and another priority I think is very well worth mentioning is to maintain and continue to grow our advanced placement program for students, particularly at the high school level. Last year we received an award for one of 500 school districts throughout the entire United States and Canada from college boards for the number of students as well as the number of advanced placement programs we have, something we should be very proud of.
Definitely, and we want to make sure that all our learners are going as far as they can in high school and learning as much as they can. So I think it's great that we're able to offer those things. Okay,
we're talking about the 2015-16 budget. Now, Mrs. Green and I sit and chat about this every day, so we're hoping you're enjoying the communication. I think it's very, very important information. Okay, let's look ahead. We talked about reasonable assumptions of revenue. What are those assumptions coming from the state at this point from a revenue standpoint?
So in Governor Rendell's budget, he has additional funding for what's called basic education funding. So we can basically use it for anything in the school district to educate children. And then he also has an increase in special education funding for our district. So there's information out there what those increases are. So we're looking at about $500,000 or more in those 2 areas. So we have put that in the budget at this point based upon the governor's budget as to what our funding is going to be.
Yeah, again, lots of different communication going out there that it's new funding. But the governor's budget really is restoring that basic education subsidy back a few years. I mean, if you go back 3 or 4 years, that's what the funding level was.
Yeah, actually, we're not quite back there yet.
Yeah,
With
yeah.
this additional 500,000, we don't get quite back to I think it's the 10-11 year that he's trying to get back to. We don't get quite
Yeah.
back there to the level of funding we had at that time, but they're trying to move towards that. So it's interesting when you look back a couple years at the state funding. If you take the retirement piece that we talked about earlier, if you take that out, we have not hit levels of 9-10 yet. We still don't have the same funding from the state that we had at that time. So we're getting closer, and it's a move in the right direction to help with the funding. And because we're getting this, or hopefully getting this money, it's a good time to not have a tax increase.
Yeah. When you talk from an expense standpoint, obviously there's some major drivers. You already mentioned the state retirement system. What other major drivers drive the expense side of the budget?
Special education, we continue to have high expenses in special education. The state is trying to address that with some commissions and things, but that is growing very quickly. The expenses associated with educating our special needs children. So we had $200,000-300,000 additional expenses in that area. And then the other main driver is health insurance, which we made some pretty large changes to the health insurance last year, and our contributions from employees have increased and increase as our costs increase. They pay a percentage of what we pay. What they have to add to it does go up as our costs go up. But those three drivers, the pension, the special education, and the health insurance, contribute to in excess of 98% of the overall increase. So pretty much the overall increase in the budget are those three items.
Yeah. So again, we're pleased as we sum up the 2015-16 budget that using what we believe is a reasonable assumption about additional state funding from last year to this year, as well as use of fund balance of our savings, we're able to provide the community with a balanced budget without a tax increase. And again, I know our Board of Education is very proud of that. I know our administrative team is very proud of that as well. Yet continue to move forward with an outstanding educational program and what we promise every day to make sure we're working hard to be the best and are one of the best from an educational standpoint. We looked at last year, current year, next year. Let's just talk briefly. Obviously, we want to make sure long-term the school district is in sound financial health. Let's talk a little bit about long-term. Certainly debt, always, whether it's your personal finance at home or a business or an organization, but certainly debt is important long-term. And let's talk about long-term factors for us.
Our long-term debt portfolio is very good. We have stable payments for the next couple years, I think about the next 3 years, and then our debt does drop off considerably. We know that is coming, and that's something we can help use to make sure our capital buildings and grounds and everything continue to be exceptional as they are. So we don't have any increases coming, anything like that, and we do have those huge fall-offs in the next couple of years.
Yeah, certainly part of that, as you mentioned. First of all, as Mrs. Green talked about, significant drop-off in debt long-term, which is very important to us. But during that time, we believe our enrollment will be stable over the next 10 years, which will not require if any, additional building space likely. Probably some, we've always taken great pride in continuing to update our facilities to have state-of-the-art facilities. But that also has a large degree to do with the long-term financial health, because our facilities continue to be maintained and continue to be updated. We have a capital program on an annual basis to do work, so a very, very important part of fiscal health is the shape of your facilities.
Definitely, we want to make sure that we're keeping them up, that we don't have, that we make sure we're doing roofs, that we're doing driveways, that we're doing those things, so we don't have to do them all at one time.
Right.
That we wouldn't have to borrow a ton of money to go out and do those things. Because just like your home, if you let things go, you're going to have a big bill. But if you can do it, maintain it, and keep moving with it and do projects, that's why we have a 5-year capital plan in the district, so that we make sure we keep a handle on what needs to be done, and we do things each and every year.
Yeah, and obviously Safety and security is very important. Certainly one of our major goals is to make sure every staff member, every community member, and every student that comes onto our campuses have a safe and secure school, and that's always been a focus for us also to continue to provide updates in that area as well.
Right, we look at that as part of all the facilities when we look at the facilities.
Yep. So I think from a long-term, I know from a long-term financial health, we're in really good shape. And, a healthy fund balance, not excessive, but a healthy fund balance to be able to handle the rainy day and also to provide for good cash flow purposes, strong, good facilities. We continue to adequately budget for the facilities, stable enrollment. So I think long-term, lowering debt structure long-term, I think long-term we're in outstanding fiscal health overall.
I agree, and again, emphasizing that we're not a district that has tons of extra money sitting there, but we have things stable and we keep evaluating all the time.
Yeah. We could spend a lot of time, but there is a detailed budget posted on our website as well as every building. Do you want to tell people how to access it, more information if they want it?
If you go onto our district website, www.sycsd.org, or you can type in Southern York County School District and I'm sure it'll pull up our website. You can go in under district and there is area for budgets. And you can look at the 2015-16 proposed general fund budget on there. That was approved at the April board meeting, and then the final is slated to be approved at the May board meeting.
Yeah. And if you have any questions, certainly call the school district at 235-4811. Ask for Mrs. Green or ask for Wayne McCullough. Either of us or both of us are certainly happy to sit down and talk with any individual who has any questions about the budget. Happy to meet with any community group and organization. I know this week I'm meeting with some PTO groups to review the budget and so forth. So we want to make sure that if you have any question that you have the opportunity to get dialogue with us to share that information. Is very, very important to us. And again, one more time, our commitment to you is to make sure that every dollar you provide to us is spent wisely, and that's very, very important to us because we know those dollars are very hard earned. And we also know, obviously, in our community are some people living on retired incomes and fixed incomes. So again, we treat and respect every dollar you provide for us, and thank you very much because I know education has always been a priority for our community, and we thank you for that. And we're working really hard again to continue to provide the best education possible here. Just from a district status report. Dr. Lamont, Dr. Brycing, we're so fortunate to have outstanding leadership, and I mention that because I think it's important for our community to hear that. And again, I know if you ever have questions from an educational or fiscal side, Dr. Lamont and Dr. Brycing are available as well to sit and chat with you and answer any questions. So, anything you want to add, Mrs. Green?
If I can quickly add, I just want to put a plug in for our senior rebate program, which seniors can apply to until May 15th. If you have any questions on that, you can call the district administration office. You can speak with myself or Cindy Forbes, either of us, and we can help you through the process. So if it's a low-income senior that is having trouble paying their tax bill or needs assistance, we can help you fill out the application and you may qualify for our rebate program, which is similar to the state's rebate program.
Very good. Okay, so again, thank you so much for being with us. For Mr. Tim Hare's video production class, for Mr. Mark Rill, our coordinator of marketing and public information, for our business manager, Mrs. Susan Green, I'm Wayne McCullough saying I'll see you next time.